There is an old saying among homicide investigators: the most dangerous desires have no sound, the most silent killers have no face, and the most terrifying neighbor you'll ever have is the one who's already buried 7 women and still waves at you from his driveway every single morning. You think you know what a serial killer looks like. You've seen the movies, the wild eyes, the dark alleys, the trench coat in the rain, but let me tell you something that will keep you awake tonight. The most prolific serial killer in modern American history didn't lurk in shadows. He designed skyscrapers. He wore reading glasses. He carried a leather briefcase through the streets of Manhattan 5 days a week. He coached Little League on Saturdays. He helped his neighbors fix their porches on Sundays. And then, when his wife left town to visit family, he would sit down at his computer, open a 54-page document he called his planning manual, and begin hunting women with the precision of an engineer drafting blueprints for a building that would never exist. His name was Rex Heuermann, and for over 30 years, he turned murder into architecture. There's something people never tell you about Long Island. Beneath the manicured lawns and the good school districts, there's a stretch of highway called Ocean Parkway that runs along the southern shore near a place called Gilgo Beach. Sand dunes, marshland, thick brush that swallows everything it touches. The kind of place where the wind howls louder than any scream ever could. And on December 11, 2010, a police officer training his cadaver dog along that desolate highway stumbled onto something wrapped in burlap, positioned carefully, deliberately, almost respectfully, as if whoever left it there wanted the body to be found eventually but not too soon. It was 24-year-old Melissa Bartholomew. Within days, 3 more bodies surfaced from that marshy graveyard like secrets the earth could no longer keep. Megan Waterman, 22, a young mother from Maine who had dreams she never got to chase. Amber Costello, 27, a woman fighting addiction who wanted nothing more than a second chance at life. And Maureen Brainard Barnes, 25, a woman who once told a friend she wanted to open her own business someday. All of them sex workers, all of them petite, all of them with hauntingly similar features, and all of them wrapped like packages and discarded along that highway like construction debris dumped after a renovation project. By spring of 2011, the search had expanded. 10 sets of human remains were pulled from the brush along Ocean Parkway. Someone had been using Gilgo Beach as their personal burial ground, and they had been doing it for decades. But here is where this story separates itself from every serial killer case you have ever heard. Because Rex Heuermann didn't kill like other predators. He didn't act on impulse. He didn't spiral out of control. He didn't leave behind sloppy evidence because his hands were shaking. No, Rex Heuermann approached murder the way he approached a Manhattan high-rise. Every load-bearing wall calculated, every structural risk accounted for, every exit route pre-planned down to the minute. While other killers made mistakes because emotion clouded their judgment, Heuermann removed emotion from the equation entirely. He turned human beings into problems to be solved. And then he documented the solutions. There is a saying in forensic psychology that should terrify every person listening to this right now. The killer who journals is the killer who improves. And Rex Heuermann kept the most horrifying journal in American criminal history. Hidden inside his basement computer, investigators found a file he created around the year 2000. He titled it HK 2000, 54 pages. Organized into sections like a construction manual. The first section was labeled Problems, and the very first word listed under that heading was DNA. Not guilt, not conscience, not the faces of the women he destroyed. DNA, because that was his enemy, not morality, science. The document continued with sections on camera detection, witness identification, evidence disposal. Then came the section labeled Supplies, tools for restraint, materials for what he clinically called body preparation, equipment for transport. Every item listed like a shopping list for the apocalypse. But the section that made hardened homicide detectives need counseling was the one he titled Things to Remember. And inside that section, in cold, mechanical language, Rex Heuermann had written notes to himself about how to kill more efficiently next time. Hit harder. Light rope broke under stress of being tight. Consider hit to face or neck next time for takedown. Not enough hits to take down. Read those words again, slowly. Let them settle into your bones, because those aren't the ramblings of a madman scribbling on a prison wall. Those are performance reviews, self-evaluations, a professional critiquing his own work and identifying areas for improvement. The way an architect might review why a beam cracked under pressure and adjust the specifications for the next project. Except the projects were women, and the specifications were methods of killing them. Then came the section he labeled body prep, two words that should never exist next to each other in any document created by a human being. Remove head and hands, remove ID marks, and then a note so casual it reads like a preference on a restaurant order. Small is good. He was referring to victim size. The smaller the woman, the easier the disposal. That was his calculation. That was his preference. Not hair color, not personality, not anything remotely human, weight and transportability. Because to Rex Heuermann, these women were never people. They were logistics problems with heartbeats. There's a proverb that haunts me every time I read about this case. The devil doesn't come dressed in red with horns and a pitchfork. He comes as everything you ever wished for. And for 30 years, Massapequa Park wished for a good neighbor, a reliable community member. A man who showed up to block parties and helped carry groceries and remembered your kid's name. Rex Heuermann gave them exactly that, the perfect disguise, because he understood something most people never want to accept. Normalcy is the most dangerous camouflage a predator can wear. His system was terrifyingly methodical. He would wait, patient as a spider sitting at the center of a web it spent weeks constructing. The moment his wife left town to visit family, the killing cycle would begin. Using burner phones registered under fake identities like Andrew Roberts and Springfield Man 9, he would contact sex workers through websites like Craigslist and Backpage. He would arrange meetings in remote locations, always near highways, always near routes that led back to that cursed stretch of Ocean Parkway. And then he would do what the planning document had prepared him to do. What happened during those encounters was so brutal that prosecutors have refused to release the full details to protect the families of the victims. But we know what came after. The bodies were meticulously prepared, wrapped, transported, positioned along Gilgo Beach with the care of a man who had done this many times before and planned to do it many more. And by the time his wife returned home, Rex Heuermann was back on his driveway, waving, smiling, the suburban father who never missed a soccer game. But killing wasn't enough for him. Destruction wasn't enough. Because Rex Heuermann didn't just want to take lives. He wanted to watch the aftermath burn. Using the same burner phones he used to lure his victims, he would call their families, not to confess, not to apologize, to torment. The most documented case involves Melissa Barthelomew's 16-year-old sister, a teenage girl still. Drowning in grief over her murdered sibling, Heuermann called her, and in a voice that prosecutors described as deliberate and sadistic, he said 7 words that should make your blood run cold. Do you know what your sister is doing? She's a whore. Imagine hearing that. You're 16 years old, your sister is dead, and her killer is calling your phone to make sure the pain never stops. That wasn't a crime of passion. That was entertainment, recreation. A predator savoring the suffering he created the way a normal person savors a sunset. For 13 years after the bodies were discovered, the Gilgo Beach case went cold. Ice cold. Hundreds of tips leading nowhere. Thousands of interviews producing nothing. Multiple task forces spinning their wheels in the sand. And through it all, Rex Heuermann sat in his living room watching the documentaries about his own crimes. Searching Google over 200 times for phrases like, why could law enforcement not trace the Long Island serial killer calls and unsolved serial killer cases? He wasn't searching out of fear. He was searching out of pride, admiring his own work, reviewing his legacy the way a retired architect might revisit photographs of buildings he designed decades ago. Except his buildings were graves, and his blueprints were written in blood. There is a dark truth that criminal profilers whisper to each other but rarely say out loud. The ones who follow their own cases in the media are the ones who will never stop killing voluntarily. Rex Heuermann proved that truth with every Google search, Every documentary he watched about himself, every news article he read about the family still begging for answers. He wasn't monitoring the investigation out of paranoia. He was feeding, sustaining himself on the chaos he had created. Reliving every moment through the lens of journalists who had no idea the man they were writing about was reading their words and smiling. But evil has a fatal flaw, and it is the same flaw that has brought down every monster who ever believed they were smarter than the world around them. Arrogance. Not carelessness, not recklessness. Arrogance. The quiet, creeping belief that you have beaten the system so many times that the system can never catch you. Because on January 26, 2023, Rex Heuermann finished his lunch on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. He wiped his mouth, adjusted his glasses, and tossed a half-eaten pizza crust into a garbage can outside his office. A gesture so ordinary that he probably forgot about it before he reached the crosswalk. But he didn't know that a surveillance team had been watching him for weeks. He didn't know that advances in genetic genealogy had quietly narrowed the field of suspects down to a handful of names. And he didn't know that within minutes of his pizza crust hitting that garbage can, a gloved hand would retrieve it and rush it to a forensic DNA laboratory. Within hours, the sample was processed. Within days, the result came back. A match, hair found on the body of Megan Waterman, connected directly to the man who had just casually discarded his lunch on a Manhattan sidewalk. After 30 years of meticulous planning, after 54 pages of calculated precision, after 7 murdered women and a lifetime of suburban camouflage, Rex Heuermann was undone by a piece of pizza crust he couldn't be bothered to throw away properly. There's a dark irony in that. A man who documented every detail of his crimes, who cataloged disposal methods, who wrote notes about rope tension and strike velocity, who planned alibis and monitored news coverage and adjusted his techniques after every kill. That same man was brought down by the one thing his planning document never accounted for: his own garbage. On July 13, 2023, Rex Heuermann left his Manhattan office for the last time. He stepped outside into the summer evening air, adjusted his briefcase, walked toward his vehicle, and then the world he had so carefully constructed for 3 decades collapsed. Around him, like a building with a fractured foundation, dozens of officers surrounded him. The words hit him like concrete. Rex Heuermann, you are under arrest for murder. The search of his Massapequa Park home took 12 days. 12 days to process what investigators described as a massive amount of evidence. In the basement, they found a walk-in vault, computer equipment with desperately deleted files, the 54-page murder manual he thought he had destroyed, and personal items belonging to victims who had been missing for decades. Throughout the house, they recovered over 350 electronic devices, thousands of photographs and videos, detailed maps of dump sites along Ocean Parkway, weapons, restraint devices, tools that matched descriptions in his planning document. In the backyard, they found disturbed earth, areas that required excavation, evidence of frequent digging over many years. It took multiple trucks to haul everything away. 30 years of evidence, 30 years of trophies, 30 years of proof that the most dangerous predator on Long Island had been hiding behind a white picket fence and a firm handshake. What investigators discovered next would reveal that Rex Heuermann's reign of terror was far longer and far darker than anyone had imagined. The charges would multiply, the victim count would grow, and the courtroom revelations would force an entire community to confront the most terrifying question a neighbor can ever ask. Did I ever really know the person living next door to me? The answer for Massapequa Park was devastating, and the truth is, it always is. Because the devil doesn't announce himself with fire and brimstone. He announces himself with a friendly wave and a freshly mowed lawn. And sometimes 30 years of silence is louder than any scream. There is a quote from a criminal behaviorist that has stayed with me for years. The scariest thing about monsters is not what they do in the dark. It is what they do in the daylight and how normal it looks. And nothing looked more normal than Rex Heuermann sitting silently in a courtroom while prosecutors peeled back layer after layer of horror that he had spent 3 decades burying along a stretch of highway most people only knew from their morning commute. When the initial charges were filed in 2023, the world learned 3 names: Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello. 3 women, 3 lives erased, 3 families shattered beyond anything most people could comprehend. But investigators knew the number was wrong. They knew 3 was only the beginning, because the planning document didn't describe 3 kills. The DNA didn't connect to 3 victims. And the disturbed earth in that backyard didn't tell a story that ended with 3 graves. In January of 2024, the 4th charge arrived. Maureen Brainard Barnes, 25 years old when she disappeared in 2007. A woman who had told friends she wanted to build something better for herself, something stable, something safe. She never got the chance, because somewhere between her last phone call and her last breath, she crossed paths with a man who saw her as nothing more than an entry in a planning document. Another variable to calculate, another problem to solve, another body to prepare and position along Ocean Parkway like a piece of furniture being placed according to a floor plan. Then in June of 2024, 2 more names were added to the indictment. And this is where the case transforms from disturbing to almost incomprehensible. Jessica Taylor, a woman who was not just murdered but beheaded and dismembered in 2003. Her torso was found first in a wooded area of Manorville, nearly 40 miles from Gilgo Beach. Her skull and other remains were later discovered along Ocean Parkway with the other victims. 2 locations, 1 killer. A man so methodical that he split a human being across 2 dump sites to reduce the chance of identification. And then Sandra Costello, murdered in 1993. 1993. That means Rex Heuermann had been killing since before some of you listening to this were even born. 31 years. An entire generation lived and grew up while this man was quietly perfecting his methods and burying women in the sand. Sandra Costello is believed to be his earliest known victim. But investigators have made it very clear that the word known carries enormous weight in that sentence. Because who was Rex Heuermann before 1993? Was he already hunting, already watching, already writing the first pages of that monstrous planning document? The answer terrifies everyone involved in the investigation. Because predators like Heuermann don't start at the top. They build upward, like architects. By December of 2024, a 7th victim was added. Valerie Mack, murdered around the year 2000. Another young woman dismembered and discarded. Another life reduced to evidence tags and forensic reports. 7 confirmed murders spanning 31 years. And Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney stood before cameras and said words that should send a chill through every person hearing them right now. We are going to continue. We are not going to stop. There could be more murders out there. More, not might be, could be. As if the investigation itself was afraid of what it would find next. There's something profoundly disturbing about a killer who improves. Most criminals deteriorate over time. They get sloppy. They get desperate. They get caught because their discipline collapses under the weight of what they have done. But Rex Heuermann did the opposite. He evolved. Each murder taught him something. Each victim became a lesson. Each mistake was documented and corrected with the cold efficiency of an engineer adjusting load calculations after a stress test. The early kills showed signs of improvisation. By the later murders, the methodology was almost surgical. He wasn't losing control. He was gaining it. And that is what separates him from almost every serial killer in American criminal history. Most predators are driven by chaos. Rex Heuermann was driven by order. And order is infinitely more dangerous. Because chaos eventually consumes itself. Order sustains. Order adapts. Order survives. And if it weren't for a discarded piece of pizza and a breakthrough in genetic genealogy, order would still be killing today. At each court appearance, Rex Heuermann sat motionless. No emotion. No remorse. No flicker of recognition that the words being spoken described real women with real families and real futures that he had incinerated. Prosecutors detailed the planning document. They read aloud his notes about hitting harder and adjusting rope tension. They described the taunting phone calls to grieving families. They presented the 200 Google searches where he admired his own handiwork from the safety of his suburban living room. And through all of it, Huerman sat like a man reviewing quarterly earnings reports. Detached, clinical, present in body but absent in anything resembling humanity. His defense attorney offered only one statement that anyone remembers. These charges are difficult to defend. Difficult. Not wrong. Not unjust. Not mistaken. Difficult. As if even the man hired to protect him understood there was nothing left to protect. But what haunts investigators more than the courtroom revelations is what they still don't know. 7 victims have been identified. 7 families have received the devastating confirmation that their daughters and sisters and mothers are never coming home. But the planning document references scenarios and techniques that don't match any of the 7 known cases. The maps recovered from his home include locations that haven't been searched yet. The 350 electronic devices are still being processed, and the backyard excavation raised more questions than it answered. The task force is now reviewing hundreds of unsolved cases across multiple states, looking for his signature, the dismemberment, the decapitation, the removal of identifying marks, the careful positioning of remains, the selection of victims who matched his. Preferred type: small, vulnerable, marginalized. Women the world wasn't looking hard enough for. Women he calculated nobody would miss urgently enough to trigger a serious investigation. And that calculation is perhaps the cruelest part of this entire case, because Rex Huerman didn't just exploit his victims. He exploited the system's indifference toward them. He chose women who existed on the margins, women whose disappearances would be filed but not prioritized, women whose families would scream for help and hear nothing but echoes in return. He weaponized society's blind spots the same way he weaponized his suburban respectability. Both were tools, both were calculated, and both worked for 3 decades. There is a question that hangs over this case like smoke that refuses to clear. How many more are out there? How many more women vanished into Rex Huerman's system and were never connected to Gilgo Beach? How many more families are sitting in living rooms right now staring at photographs of daughters who disappeared 10 or 20 or 30 years ago and never came home? The investigation continues. The DNA analysis continues. The device examination continues. And every new discovery peels back another layer of horror from a case that seems to have no bottom. Rex Huerman now faces multiple life sentences. He will almost certainly die inside a prison cell. The architect who designed Manhattan skyscrapers will spend his remaining years in a concrete box smaller than the walk-in vault he kept in his basement. The man who once controlled every variable of every kill will now have every minute of every day controlled for him. When he eats, when he sleeps, when he breathes fresh air. If he breathes fresh air, every freedom stripped away with the same methodical precision he once used to strip away human lives. But the damage cannot be undone. Melissa Bartholomew will never turn 25. Megan Waterman will never watch her child grow up. Amber Costello will never get her second chance. Maureen Brainard Barnes will never open that business she dreamed about. Jessica Taylor will never be whole again. Sandra Costilla has been waiting for justice since before most of us knew what justice meant. And Valerie Mack spent over 2 decades in an evidence file before anyone could even say her name in a courtroom. 7 women. 7 futures demolished. 7 families who spent years begging a system to look harder and care more and do something. Anything. And all because one man decided that his need to destroy was more important than their right to exist. There's a final truth about this case that I need you to carry with you long after this video ends. Rex Huerman was not caught because the system worked. He was caught because science evolved faster than his ability to adapt to it. For 30 years the system failed. For 30 years investigators chased shadows, while a monster coached baseball and designed buildings and sat at dinner tables and slept beside a woman who had no idea she was sharing a bed with the most prolific serial killer on the eastern seaboard. For 30 years, 7 families screamed into a void and heard nothing come back. The system didn't catch Rex Huerman. A pizza crust caught Rex Heuermann, and that should terrify every single one of us. Because if the technology had arrived 5 years later, he would still be out there, still hunting, still documenting, still improving, still waving at his neighbors on Saturday morning while the ghosts of 7 women rotted beneath the sand dunes of a beach most Long Islanders drive past without a second thought. The margin between justice and catastrophe was a half-eaten slice of pizza and a forensic technique that didn't exist 10 years ago. That is not a victory. That is a warning. There is a proverb that detectives in the Suffolk County Task Force reportedly shared among themselves during the darkest days of this investigation. Evil does not rest, it relocates. Rex Heuermann understood relocation better than anyone. He relocated his identity every time he picked up a burner phone. He relocated his crimes every time he wrapped a body in burlap and drove to Ocean Parkway. He relocated his guilt every time he walked through the front door of his Massapequa Park home and became a father and a husband and a neighbor and a friend. He relocated his humanity so far from himself that by the end there was nothing left but architecture. Blueprints for buildings that touched the sky and blueprints for murders that sank into the earth. The same mind designed both. The same hands built both. And for 3 decades nobody noticed because nobody thought to look. And that is the lesson Rex Heuermann leaves behind. Not that monsters exist. We already knew that. Not that evil hides in plain sight. We have heard that before. The lesson is simpler and far more devastating. We are not as safe as we believe we are. The systems we trust to protect us are slower than the predators they chase. The neighbors we wave to every morning carry secrets we will never see. And the line between ordinary life and unimaginable horror is thinner than the wall between a suburban living room and a basement vault full of evidence that 7 women ever existed at all. Rex Heuermann sits in a cell tonight. The investigation continues tomorrow. And somewhere along a windswept stretch of Ocean Parkway, the sand still shifts, the brush still whispers, and the earth still holds secrets that no one has found yet. There is one final quote I want to leave you with. Not from a detective, not from a prosecutor, not from a profiler or a journalist or a criminologist, from Rex Heuermann's own planning document. A single line buried among the calculations and the checklists and the cold mechanical notes about rope tension and strike velocity. A line that proves he knew exactly what he was. A line that proves the mask was never accidental. A line that should keep you awake tonight and make you look a little longer at the faces you think you know. He wrote simply, quietly, almost as an afterthought between entries about body disposal and dump site access routes. Blend in. 2 words. That was his entire philosophy, his entire survival strategy, his entire life compressed into a single instruction he gave himself like a reminder to pick up milk on the way home. Blend in. And for 30 years he did exactly that, perfectly, seamlessly, invisibly, until science finally caught up with the monster who thought he had outrun everything. But here is the question that will follow this case for decades. The question that investigators are still afraid to answer. The question that hangs over Gilgo Beach like fog that never lifts. If he blended in so perfectly for so long in a community that knew his face and his name and his family and his work and his habits and his smile, who else is blending in right now? Sleep well tonight and lock your doors.